Welcome to the Hidden Podcast, where we simplify cybersecurity and all things tech for those of you who, like me, need it to be explained without all the jargon. So, if you've ever wondered why you still feel vulnerable even though you've bought all the fancy tools, you've come to the right place. I'm your host, Lynn, and my job is to take one of our resident experts and help them translate their cyber expertise into plain English. This means having practical conversations, usually built around Babbel's hidden cybersecurity framework, which we break down in the show. Or sometimes we'll take a hot topic in the tech industry, like a major breach or a new legislation, and we'll explain how we help you stay ahead. Basically, this podcast exists so that you can sleep well at night, preferably not during the podcast. Joining me in the virtual studio today is Callum Archer. Thanks for being here, Callum.
Yeah, no problem.
Awesome. So before we dive in, do you mind telling our friends listening or watching out there a little bit about yourself in terms of what you do and where you live?
Yep. So I live in Reading in the UK. I'm the solution lead for cybersecurity at Babbel. So my main role and responsibility is to support our teams and customers with their cybersecurity journey, making sure they've got all the tools, all the information they need to stay safe out there.
Awesome. And what would you say you like most about what you do?
I really like solving problems. A lot of the times customers come to us not knowing what to do, what to talk about. And, I love the feeling of supporting customers and, helping them feel secure in whatever it is that they do.
Nice, making you one of the most perfect guests for this episode. So without further ado, today we're unpacking the two-part question, which is how quickly would you know if a device was compromised? And more importantly, how would you act? So diving right in, Callum, why are endpoints still one of the most targeted attack surfaces?
Yeah, I think it's a great question. I would have to say, from my perspective, endpoints or laptops, tablets, and devices, have never been used more. We're living in a increasingly digital world, and the way that people work, they travel all over the world, and they've never had more devices. And this allows customers to work freely, work wherever they want, but also creates a number of security challenges. I think for me, endpoints have always been particularly targeted because there are so many of them. And, with cybersecurity, it's a numbers game. If attackers or adversaries are looking for an entry point, within an organization, there might be over 100, 150, 200 different little keyholes for them to try and break into. And when we look under the hood of why, from a technical perspective, this is still an issue, within our SMB customers, we still see massive disparity and inconsistencies in between the security policies and practices in play. And also, more importantly, some of the vulnerabilities that are on these devices. I still see countless examples of unpatched or out of date operating systems. We still see security policies not lining up with what corporate or kind of, head of companies are wanting to achieve. And even if, let's say, all of our customers did have best-in-class software, robust security policies, one of the major challenges I see is what I would call alert fatigue. So often our customers are reliant on one person keeping the lights on, keeping up with innovation, making sure that their internal customers the day-to-day users are able to access what they work. And oftentimes, we see massive examples of what I would call alert fatigue, where if I've got 500, 600 alerts to look at on top of my day job, how am I supposed to prioritize and know what's real and what is going to be the biggest threat to my business? So yeah, in summary, endpoint security is still absolutely at the forefront of what our customers should care about, and I think there's a long way for us to go collectively to keep secure.
Thanks for sharing, Callum. That really sets the tone and basically highlights the importance of having this conversation in the first place. So, you had touched on the sentiment around these known exploits remaining open for months in a lot of these SMB environments. So what happens when an endpoint remains vulnerable or undetected?
Yeah, look, I think this is a massive challenge that we're seeing. And actually, if you look into the news recently, I think touching on, some of the kind of scariest and newest exploits that we've seen, Claude have really taken the lead, and Anthropic into highlighting some potential massive issues with unpatched devices and known vulnerabilities. AI is really accelerating this problem. And if we collectively don't get ahead of this, we could see very real world scenarios where, overnight, there's 150 vulnerabilities that we didn't know about that have now all been exploited, and, allows critical infrastructure to be to go down, for schools to not be able to teach children, and for SMBs not to operate. So really getting ahead of these exploits is massively critical to stay on the front foot in cybersecurity and to increase your posture. So I think in the modern day, it's really a two-pronged approach, really. I think, first of all, practical steps that you can implement is increased monitoring and visibility. So, you know, correlating all of your data and telemetry around your environment into a single source, security events, incident management tool. One of the kind of major ones we work with internally with our customers is Microsoft Sentinel. And that really allows you to have a single source of truth for what's going on in your environment. And with the right resource and specialized expertise, allows you to really aggregate that data and get the most out of it, to make sure that if there are those alerts that you don't know about, there are those known kind of exploits, you can kind of try to stay on the front foot with it. Secondly, I think, let's start with what you do know. If there is patches that need to be done, or you are self-aware that you're not 100%, taking practical steps, investing in getting those patches up, and really tightening the screws on your infrastructure, is probably something that I'd recommend while we detect that.
Yeah, love that. Great pro tips shared. And I really appreciated that mention of Anthropic, more specifically Claude as well, because it reminded me of a previous conversation I had with Mark Hodell and James Gaskell in previous episodes around scattershot attacks and just how AI is automating these cyber threats as well. So that was great to note. And also that last point that you mentioned, particularly around Microsoft Sentinel, could, I'm assuming, correct me if I'm wrong, be a nice workaround to just start to target that alert fatigue for those businesses that don't necessarily have a fully fledged IT team.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, awesome. All right. So, Callum, what is lateral movement and how does it happen once a device has been compromised?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I think for me, in cybersecurity terms, lateral movement is when an adversary will move from one part of your environment to another. So some real world examples of what that means, if we're sticking with the endpoint theme, is, let's say an adversary is on my laptop. What they'll look to do next is move to something like your 365 environment to try and provide better access to get what they're after. It might be that they're moving onto a secondary endpoint, that they're going to try and get as many of your endpoints under their control to shut them down as possible. It might be that they're going to try and move onto your email platforms to send, internal communications to try and get access from someone more senior or with better access in your environment. So it's a massive, massive problem. And I think for me, what happens when someone's in to stop containment is speed. You need to quickly be able to detect and isolate where the adversary is coming from to essentially limit the damage. It's almost like putting a force field around them, right? So they've broken into your house, but they can't move. They're stuck where they are. And then from there, it's really about damage containment.
Okay, thanks for clearing that up. So, switching gears now to antivirus versus modern endpoint detection response. Many businesses still think that antivirus equals protection. Callum, why is that misconception now outdated?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I was speaking to a customer yesterday around this very topic. Antivirus was the answer to the great question of security in 2016, 2017, 2018. The way that these traditional tools work is they have a list of what is good and they have a list of what is bad. And that is how they are architecturally blocking threats. So this is great and was great when we could keep up with the amount of attacks. But where we started to see issues with this is when adversaries became more advanced, and it's actually moved forward a couple of steps even since then. And we're seeing artificial intelligence really accelerate the need for change in the space. But for us, for a few years now, traditional antivirus hasn't been enough because of the change in attacks. We've seen a exponential rise in ransomware or malware-free attacks, where we're looking at behavior impersonation attacks to break in. And if someone is just pretending to be someone, and there's no, the term is payload, there's no malicious software that can be detected, ultimately your antivirus becomes useless. And this has created the need for extended detection and proactive tools that are built into the software layer of what we're doing. So this has really seen a rise into endpoint detection and response tools that allow you to proactively search and what we would call threat hunt these adversaries. Essentially, the biggest change that I've seen in that space is having a purely defensive approach to allow you to go and be proactive, to go and search, to go and hunt, and to go and contain, as I was mentioning before. And this has really seen seismic shift in how we are able to go and contain that lateral movement. And yeah, I see that as a positive.
Okay, definitely a positive. But something that you had said jumped out at me around malware-free attacks, if I got that right. What are those exactly?
So a malware-free attack is where an adversary is trying to, break into your environment. They're trying to extort you in a non-traditional way. So back in the day, we would see someone downloads a file. That file has malware in it. And from there, they'll look to shut down your systems, exploit you for money until you pay them. They'll keep you offline. They'll encrypt your systems. They'll shut things down. And that is typically traditionally how adversaries have acted. It's the techniques that they use. However, they started to realize a few years ago, some of these groups, that this is maybe an archaic way of working from their perspective. The endpoint tools have caught up. They've got a good list of how they work, the pieces of software that they use, and ultimately, that isn't going to get them what they need to do, as hackers and adversaries. So malware-free attacks now would refer to any technique or mission from one of these adversaries that doesn't involve that traditional piece of malware, malicious software. So common examples of this in the real world would be a phishing attack. So someone gets an email, let's say pretending to be Babbel's chief revenue officer, saying we need this information, we need to buy you gift cards, and that's how they'll typically gain entry, gain trust, and from there they'll look to get the information they need without having to shut anything down. So these behaviour-based attacks or malware-free attacks are way more common now. And this is why, as security partners to our customers, we've had to be a lot more agile and proactive around how we look at these threats, because simply if we don't change, we won't be able to keep up and our customers will have to pay the price.
We definitely do not want that. So thank you for that explanation, Callum. And as you were speaking, it reminded me of the third episode on human risk, which of course forms part of the hidden framework. So do check that out if you want to dive a little bit deeper into these behavior-based attacks as well. But bringing it back to endpoint protection, let's talk about inconsistent device standards, which you briefly touched on at the beginning of this conversation. So Callum, what risks does that create?
The way that I kind of read that question that you put to me is, what are devices, where are they kept, and what will and won't our customers accept in regards to those policies? So I think a really good example of this, and where we've definitely seen, people be caught out, is around how our customers can police and kind of protect personal devices. So for example, if you've got contractors coming into the business that want to use their own personal phone and laptops, what will you allow them to access? What asks will you have from them around, latest operating system? Another big one that we see is actually on your endpoints, browser updates and services, as well, as this is a common way that we see exploits come in. So ultimately, you can have, using that example, you can have a fantastic corporate policy around endpoints and laptops where you have latest OS updated, you've got your endpoint agents installed. That's fine. But if you allow anyone to come in to your network and use a personal device that is, working alongside you, essentially your device posture and security scoring will be massively reduced to whatever level of control you've put on those personal devices. Because one of the things that I always really try and hit home to our customers is it doesn't matter what the strongest part of your security is, it will always be the weakest part that lets you down and that will be exploited. So effectively, if you have inconsistent device standards, you really do leave yourself at risk to, be exploited and have that come back to bite you.
Definitely. Would you say that, companies are still, for the most part, the ones that you deal with, are putting more of a focus on protecting their laptops and desktops more so than their mobile devices, whether they're corporate owned or BYOD?
I think it's really dependent on the customers that we speak to. Often, if we have a customer that is more familiar with endpoint security for laptops, they might not have necessarily the same protection on mobiles. But I think the point is valid. If mobiles are a part of your business and are important to the way that you work, and you don't have that protection on there, you don't invest in tooling, you don't invest in security, you don't have MDM, you don't roll things out securely with Intune. Ultimately, that is a weak endpoint and inconsistent device standards. And based on what I've just said, it doesn't matter really. It doesn't. What I can tell you, it doesn't matter to an adversary if it's a laptop, if it's an iPad, if it's a mobile. If it is a weakling, they will exploit it. So it's really, really important that you work with someone, whether it's internally, whether it's a company like Babel, that understands those risks, so we can give you practical steps to reduce that security issue.
Thanks for that, Callum. So we've spoken about where these gaps typically exist. Now let's talk about what good looks like as far as endpoint protection is concerned. So Callum, what would you say are your non-negotiables for endpoint protection today?
Yeah, it's a great question. So up to date and next generation antivirus products are an essential. So we work with many here. There's many available in the market. So I won't name names, but people that have the ability to hunt using software that have that EDR capability, that new world kind of flavor of software that allows for behavior and contextualized based threat hunting and blocking is critical for me. From an internal perspective, having the capability that allows you to monitor proactively these alerts using something like a Seam or Sentinel. And if it isn't a non-negotiable now, I can tell you this time next year it will be. Having 24/7 coverage to monitor and respond to these threats as well, you will be caught out at some point if you don't have this in. It's not a matter of if anymore, it's a matter of when. So yeah, I'd say for me, that's really, really the non-negotiable that I see.
Okay, great. Thanks for that. So, as you know, Hidden is all about giving that visibility and ways of measuring one's cybersecurity posture, right? And obviously shining a light on where these gaps are. So, in your opinion, what metrics actually demonstrate endpoint maturity?
Yeah, I think there's a few bits we can look at. We work with a lot of Microsoft customers, whether that is for endpoint security or a wider investment in collaboration tools. A good starting point for me, if you fall into that category, is reviewing your Microsoft Secure Score. So this is a set of guidelines and principles set out by Microsoft that will give you a baseline understanding of where your security posture is today. So looking into that, looking into how your policies are configured, best practice guides, would be a great way of seeing metrics, right? You see a score, you see how it's benchmarked against your peers, and it gives you actionable insights to go and kind of prepare and remediate those actions. I think secondly, for me, in cybersecurity, if it wasn't before, it certainly is now, the name of the game is speed. And the way that we measure that speed is with two different metrics. It's MTTR and MTTD, and that means mean time to detect and mean time to respond. Essentially, what that's looking out for is, can we detect an adversary faster they can do something wrong? And can we respond to that adversary before they can break out? You know, those are the two metrics that all of the CISOs I speak to know, all of the IT security professionals know. And it's a constant battle because that number is coming down daily. I think the fastest one, and this is maybe a good statistic to end on, working with, a number of technology partners in the industry, we get some really strong intelligence around how fast these attacks are going. The quickest adversary that we've seen break in, steal information, and break out again was 27 seconds, and that was using AI. So my question and closing statement to our customers is, do you think you could respond to an incident in 27 seconds? And if you can't, you probably need to revisit your strategy.
Wow. Yeah, that is definitely a mind-boggling statistic. And it segues nicely into the last question that I have for you, which is if one's personal laptop or phone were compromised right now, what would be the first step to contain the threat?
Report it straight away. Yeah. Don't try and, if you're not an IT security person, don't do it yourself. Go and report it straight away and let the professionals do it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
perfect. That brings us to the end of this discussion on endpoint protection. Is there anything else that you would add before we officially close this out?
Nope. Thank you for having me.
Awesome. It's a pleasure to have you. That's a wrap on today's episode of the Hidden Podcast. If this episode gave you an aha moment that helped you untangle something that's been bugging you, subscribe and share it with a friend who's in the same boat. And if you're wondering where you stand across the 6 hidden layers, try our cybersecurity snapshot in the description below. It's a lot less painful than a breach. Until next time, don't let your risks stay hidden.